Ina manuhiri tuarangi a tēnā koutou katoa. Very warm greetings, everyone. It was a real pleasure and a privilege to welcome you all onto our marae this morning, and a great honour for Charles and I to be presenting to you in this forum. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Our talk is obviously in two parts, and across both, we hope to share some insights about how Te Papa, as the National Museum of Aotearoa New Zealand, is approaching our own multifaceted journey, the next phase of our evolution, if you like. And for myself, as the Director of Exhibition Renewal, I hope to give you some insights into how we're approaching that program. But let me first remind everyone, and Arapata mentioned it this morning on the marae, that Te Papa opened on Valentine's Day in 1998, and if I remember correctly, I think that was the year that Deng said he arrived in Australia. And since then, physical visitation to this building has successfully attracted around 1.3 million visitors per year. But last year, it was a surprise even to ourselves. It was an absolute standout year in the history of the museum, attracting 1.7 million coming through our doors, many of them travelling from all parts of New Zealand to see our widely acclaimed Gallipoli exhibition. So while Te Papa exit surveys and TripAdvisor posts return consistently high satisfaction rates from both local and national and international visitors, we're far from complacent. For Te Papa to remain inclusive and relevant to future generations, we know we have to be responsive and prepared for a rapidly changing world that's sometimes pretty scary and uncertain. If you read our vision statement, it's pretty obvious that Te Papa has always been orientated towards people and trying to make a positive difference to people's lives. So linking this statement to our 5-year renewal program, I'm going to focus on 3 key aspirations that are guiding our planning. The first is the notion of co-creation, where we reach out to hugely diverse audience segments to actively involve them in the development of new concepts and visitor experiences. The second one is forum for debate, our aspiration to be a national forum to facilitate dialogue particularly around issues that Te Papa is well placed to increase understanding of, whether that be our natural environment, ourselves and each other. And thirdly, transformative change, and being able to actually show evidence that we are positively impacting on people's lives, and to know that we are making a difference or making a meaningful contribution towards creating a more inclusive, tolerant and sustainable society. Like many other museum professionals the world over, we're asking ourselves some fairly searching philosophical questions at the moment about how we should evolve as an organisation to ensure that we remain economically sustainable and that we invest in exhibitions that are going to remain fresh and relevant over the next 10 years and beyond. Some questions that are no doubt of interest to this forum include: what is the role of a national museum in a transnational, multicultural, post-colonial society where settlement experiences, the experiences of being here and making a new life here and making a contribution to the economic and social fabric of this country, are perhaps becoming more relevant or important than stories about the homeland and how we got here? And how is super diversity influencing current collecting practices? And how should we be reaching out to non-museum goers who may come here, or they may not, or maybe they can't? So remembering that we're only at the early stages of this renewal program, and without wanting to plunge you into the depths of our development methodology, the first phase of exhibition planning involves a lot of teamwork. And it's a time when subject experts and designers and writers, educators and digital creatives all come together to start devising a framework of thematic ideas. We then invite subject experts, in some cases from from other institutions or indeed all walks of life from other communities to help build on those ideas. In the case of the new natural history exhibitions, we have a team of Maori experts and scientists who have been brought together to explore dual perspectives on the natural world and the management of our natural resources. So once we get these ideas to a level of description that enables prospective audiences to creatively respond to them, we use a mix of psychographic and demographic segmentation models as a means of bringing this cross-section of people together from various ethnic and socio-economic backgrounds and ages and faiths. People who will challenge and extend and build on our own thinking. Again, using natural history redevelopment as an example, next week we've got a team of educators and experience designers who are taking to the road, and they'll be running audience workshops in Christchurch, Whanganui and Dunedin. If you were in these workshops, you'd find them a lot of fun. They're really, really interactive. And we'd get you to be exploring questions like, what's unique and special to you about Aotearoa, New Zealand? Or if you were the very first person to arrive here, how would you feel and what would you experience and how would you adapt? What would you expect to see in an exhibition about the natural world that includes Māori knowledge and perspectives? In reaching out beyond our walls, we recognise that most people have multiple identities and that diversity manifests not only in a person's cultural or ethnic background, but also their experiences of being raised in New Zealand or immigrating to this country. For Pacific audiences, for example, South Auckland captures just one set of Pacific experiences in New Zealand. There are many others. And in recent times, the demographics, of course, have started to change, with towns like Oamaru and Ashburton now being centres with significant Tongan communities. And also, as you know, local communities form connections around sports clubs and schools, churches, and we need to get out there in those places where lived realities defy one-dimensional categorisations. So far from presenting an idealised picture of different ethnicities coming together in a nation of harmony and unity, Te Papa seeks to validate difference and understand the complexities of human experiences across time and place, which is now heightened through travel and technology in a very dynamic and interconnected world. So, in summary, again, the ambitions of our Renewal program is to invite visitors to be active contributors, not just passive consumers of content that's solely conceived and served up by subject experts. At the same time, we want to open up debates around contemporary issues, at times using emotion and using humour, without sanitising the tensions or complexities of the past. We're also looking to embed diversity into core exhibition narratives, rather than Indigenous or migrant stories being consigned to a subchapter of New Zealand history within perhaps a separate zone. We question the future of a so-called community gallery. We're also looking to show evidence of transformational change at an individual, family or community level, whether that be through a one-off encounter or an enduring engagement or relationship with Te Papa via our exhibitions or related digital and research and learning programs. In that regard, there are some days when you wake up and you listen to the news and just despair about the appalling social statistics that this country has, and you do wonder if you're living in La La Land working in a museum, believing that we can make a difference. And then there are other days when you are completely humbled to receive an email from a parent, in this case the mother of a brave young girl called McKenzie, and I have her permission to share her story with you briefly today. McKenzie was one of 7 guides who was selected from several applications to become a guide in our Tyrannosaurus exhibition that showed here in 2014. They had to go through a proper recruitment process, had to apply and be interviewed and all the rest of it. She loved it so much that she reapplied the following year and was again selected to be a guide for our DreamWorks animation exhibition. McKenzie has to contend with significant learning difficulties, but she gained such confidence from working in these exhibitions that she went on to give her first ever presentation at her school to her school peers, highlighting the challenges that she faces, including the bullying that she has to endure. Last year, she was nominated for a Courage Award in the annual Pride Awards that recognise the unsung heroes amongst us. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. And if I could now introduce Charles.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Thank you for the invitation to speak today, and congratulations on the splendid showing today and the, I believe, the 12th Diversity Forum. So, ngā mihi rā kia koutou katoa ko tai mai nei ki te papa Tongarewa. My name is Charles Royal, and I'm on the executive leadership team along with my colleague Karen Mason, whom you've just heard from. And my father is Maori and my mother is Pākehā, so I often describe myself as an act of intercultural theatre, constantly having dialogue with myself. But I just wanted to let you know about that, and I take both those kāwai, those heritages, I take both of them very seriously as they flow into me. My colleague Karen has set the scene by offering us a description of the new opportunities and challenges and journeys that Te Papa is now embarking upon. We are entering into an exciting period of renewal here at the museum, where all our permanent exhibitions are going to be refreshed. The Museum and Exhibition Renewal project is also an opportunity to revisit a whole host of things here inside our National Museum. They include our physical facilities, through to front of house offerings, from our ways of working together to new commercial activities, and from our events program through to our policy settings. It's a very exciting time to be here at Te Papa. It is also an opportunity to revisit our policies and approaches concerning the Treaty of Waitangi and biculturalism, which is a word that has been used since the inception of the museum. It is part of my responsibility, together with the executive leadership team, to revisit our treaty and biculturalism policies with a review to updating them and changing them and refreshing them according to the circumstances today and tomorrow. It is clear that times have changed, that circumstances have changed since the time in which Te Papa first adopted a treaty policy and a biculturalism policy. Now, regarding the treaty policy going forward, there are many questions, but there are two really quite critical questions that we're going to address as we think about the Treaty of Waitangi here in Te Papa and biculturalism, multiculturalism. The two questions that we are going to consider are the movement and transition into what is now being called the post-treaty settlement future. The idea of the post-treaty settlement future is more clearly articulated today than in the 1990s when Te Papa was first established, and it is critical that the museum stays abreast with, contributes to, and at times even leads these developments. So the first critical question that we are going to grapple with regarding our treaty policy is this notion of the post-treaty settlement future and what it might mean for New Zealand generally and what it might mean for Te Papa specifically. The second critical question, and it's the question that's particularly relevant to this forum, is the place of the treaty in an increasingly diverse and multicultural Aotearoa New Zealand. Our country has been the home for diverse ethnicities and cultures since the 19th century. The national discourse, however, regarding the treaty and multiculturalism and diversity, the national discourse to truly grapple with these questions has not been particularly great, I suggest, in the last 100 years or so. We've got a long way to go, I suggest, in resolving these kinds of questions. However, I must say, I'm heartened by Professor Ward's presentation this morning. Much of what I'm going to say is very resonant with what Professor Ward said this morning. I began work here at Te Papa only this year. I only started in February and I'm new to the museum scene. But I'm drawn to Te Papa's mandate as a cultural institution. It's a cultural forum. I'm a musician and I'm a researcher of traditional Māori knowledge, and I've been incredibly interested in how we might utilise our traditional Indigenous knowledge in new and exciting ways. I was drawn and am drawn to the storytelling that takes place here at Te Papa and the taonga and treasured objects, of course, that are in the care of the museum. And Te Papa has had a long-term interest in expressing Māori culture here inside the museum. Now, more particularly, I was drawn to Te Papa's role as a national cultural institution, a forum, a national place to conduct key conversations about and for our nation, its past, present and future. This is a vitally important role for Te Papa to play, and I see us as providing a forum for the nation to really come together and to grapple with these really quite critical issues and to educate ourselves about such things as the Treaty of Waitangi. Now, the key take-home message I wish to share with you today is intercultural capability, which kind of sounds like quite an academic kind of term. But I was pleased to hear Ian McGibbon this morning use the word intercultural dialogue. I think that this is vitally important. Our ability as individuals and groups to effectively and meaningfully communicate and relate to one another and build meaning together across ethnic, cultural and linguistic boundaries and other kinds of boundaries, age and gender and so on. In an increasingly diverse world, our ability to meaningfully relate and connect with one another, to build understanding across diverse groups of people is increasing in importance. This is as relevant to us here in New Zealand as it is in multicultural Europe, for example. It is increasing in importance and urgency, and so I applaud the Human Rights Commission for convening the New Zealand Diversity Forum today. Now, I know time is short. I'm just going to speak on a number of points regarding the notion of the post-treaty settlement future. There are a number of things that I wish to share. One of the first things is it's possible to argue that the Treaty of Waitangi was the first formal attempt at intercultural capability. It is also possible to argue that it wasn't the first formal attempt at intercultural capability. What we can say, however, whatever view we take, it is clear that the treaty was a formal attempt at establishing a relationship between two very different peoples and cultures. Of course, we need not rehearse here the well-known history of 19th and 20th colonisation. However, I do wish to note that the treaty represents, in possibility at least, the creative intersection between the culture represented by Kāwanatanga in the treaty and the culture represented by Tino Rangatiratanga in the treaty. I believe that this will be a critical feature of the post-treaty settlement future, and the lessons we draw from the creative and positive encounter will provide guidance and assistance to intercultural capability in multicultural New Zealand overall. I think this is tremendously important for us to think about. What I guess I'm saying is that the treaty was the first opportunity for the formal encounter between two peoples. We know a lot about what happened since 1840. We know the difficulties and so on that took place. And there's an important process in place now to resolve those historic difficulties. The opportunity that faces us, though, as a nation, it's before us as a nation, is the creative encounter, or the intersection between Kāwanatanga and Tino Rangatiratanga, and what can be formed, what can be positively created at the intersection between the two. I feel we haven't yet really grappled with that because this reality was interfered with or disrupted, you might say, by the difficulties of the 19th century. Ultimately, we want to get to the position where the treaty becomes an instrument for national unity rather than an instrument of national division. It will continue for some time yet. It will be appealed to yet as an instrument for the alleviation of grievance. It's critically important that genuine injustices must be addressed genuinely, and that will continue for some time yet. But it's also important for us to articulate a much larger, a much more hopeful vision for the treaty as an instrument for national unity, unifying us all into some kind of national community, respecting of our diversity, and yet unified together under the treaty. There are some who say that the settlement of treaty claims will represent the end of the treaty itself. This is very wrong. The end of treaty claims, our current treaty claims process, is the end of the treaty settlements period of the history of the treaty. What it's merely bringing to an end, resolving a whole series of historical difficulties. And let's get onto that, let's get that done. What emerges, though, however, from that is a new relationship to the treaty, a new relationship between Māori and the Crown, which I hope, and which I fervently will work towards, is a positive encounter, as I say, between Kāwanatanga and Tino Rangatiratanga. Recently, the Deputy Prime Minister announced at the coronation in Ngārua Wāhia that there will be a day to commemorate the New Zealand Wars. Now, I applaud this initiative, and the reason why I applaud this initiative is that in settling treaty claims and getting into this post-treaty settlement future, it is not merely a case that that is all done and we will put it aside and forget it. That is an immature thing for us as New Zealanders to do. A truly mature nation is one that turns and embraces and faces its history and understands it and grapples with it and comes to a new experience with it. I suggest, half of Māori grievance regarding historical treaty claims was the exasperation and frustration and pain that Māori felt from the Crown and government in simply not recognising that a wrong had been done. That was half the problem. If simply the Crown had long ago recognised genuinely that a wrong had been done, half of the heat, half of the anger, half of the pain and suffering of treaty claims and treaty grievances would have been eroded and so on. And it would have got onto the task of let's negotiate the settlements and so on. It's critically important that I feel that in the post-treaty settlement future, we will be, it's not a matter of merely forgetting that history, but becoming more informed about it, becoming more educated about it, and so on. One final point I want to make, I'm rushing through this, but one final point I want to make is that the Maori experience of wider New Zealand society of the last 150 years or so, and the experience of the government of the Crown, has been, of course we know, has been often negative. And we have created a culture based upon this negative experience. I feel that one of the most important things that Māori and New Zealand ought to do in the post-treaty settlement future is reinvestigate and revivify and bring to a new experience and a heightened understanding of the indigenous foundations of Māori culture. Not the culture that is about conflict with the Crown, but the culture that's to do with the indigenous foundations, where one is defined by one's relationship to these beautiful islands we call Aotearoa and Te Waitangi. This ought to be the basis of Māori culture and New Zealand culture going forward, that we have mutually enhancing and positive relationships with the natural world environments around us, and of course with each other. It's by the common reality, or the commonly shared reality, that we all live on these islands. We all swim in these waters. We all drink these waters. We all eat from the same place. That our relationship, all of us, Māori included, that our relationship with the natural world environment of New Zealand, of these islands, has to improve. And I suggest that this notion of indigeneity is perhaps a pathway forward to address this. Elsewhere, I've advocated for the notion of indigeneity for all, where the tangata whenuatanga of Māori continues, and strengthened and deepened, but also whereby the wisdom of the indigenous tradition is shared for the benefit of all New Zealanders and connected in a meaningful and positive way. Now, unfortunately, I'm just about to run out of time, and I was going to offer just a few thoughts around the Treaty of Waitangi and multiculturalism. The key point I just wanted to make here is that Māori haven't been terribly good on the question of multiculturalism. We have naturally been focused very much about getting our own house in order, about addressing the grievances and injustices we've had with the government and with the experiences we've had in our communities. We've spent a heck of a lot of time mounting claims before the Waitangi Tribunal, and we've spent a lot of time in a sense of general grievance and injustice and disquiet we hold with the Crown. So we Māori haven't spent a lot of time thinking about the question of multiculturalism, our relationship to multiculturalism going forward. All I want to say about that is I'm addressing us Māori here, there's a few of us here, that we need to get on board with that. We need to get on board and embrace multiculturalism. It is a reality. It is here. It's in our families. It's in our schools. It's in our communities. And we need to get on board with it. That's all I want to say about that. Kia ora, everybody.